What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is a passionate, driven leader with a no-nonsense approach. He has a laser-like focus on providing strategic and tactical solutions. He's a results-driven global hospitality executive with extensive operational and development experience. He is the executive vice president of franchise and development. Ladies and gentlemen, Keith Pierce. Welcome, Keith.
Thanks, Dan. Pleasure.
It's been so good to get to know you. I know we first met at the lodging conference.
Yeah.
We had a glass of wine in the lobby of the Marriott Desert Ridge, and you were just telling me this story of the incredible growth of Sonesta from 50 hotels before the pandemic to 1,200 hotels now.
Yeah.
Or plus or minus 1,200.
Yep, it's been amazing.
Yeah,
amazing ride.
And then I think about, obviously the title of this podcast is Defining Hospitality. But how do you define hospitality, and how do you maintain that level of hospitality throughout the growth, through this meteoric growth?
Yeah. No, listen, it's a good question, and at the core of it, hospitality is certainly what we're all about. And I define hospitality. It's the business of caring. Ultimately, it's caring for, first and foremost, your associates, your employees caring for your guests, and then caring for your developers or your new owners who are joining the Sonesta journey. And if you don't have at the core of it kind of that caring DNA, at least in my opinion, it's really hard to translate that down through to associates, and then associates onto guests, and then your developing team onto the developing community. So at the core of it, I believe caring is really kind of the underlying tenet of hospitality.
I appreciate that, and that really resonates with me and then so many of the guests that we have on as well. And I'd love to just share with the listeners or watchers, I think if I could go back to that moment where we were having that glass of wine at the lodging conference, and to just hear, I was just so struck and impressed and just appreciative of this kind of almost like a once in a lifetime opportunity that happened.
Yeah.
So
during the pandemic.
So obviously to go from 50 to 1,200, I think that may be unheard of in our industry.
Yeah. It really was a remarkable achievement. And if it was accomplished outside of a pandemic, it would be noted as a remarkable achievement. But the fact that it was accomplished during the pandemic, really puts a exclamation mark on the effort. But happy to share a little bit on the journey and how it all came to be and how the moons aligned to take this organization from 50 to the 8th largest hotel company in the country.
Yeah, 8th largest hotel company with 16 different brands.
Yep.
And then actually, I just recently listened to John Murray, his conversation with on Teague Talks.
Yes.
From his perspective at SVC, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So as far as like you two being the two main players.
Yep.
So walk us through the Cliff Note version, if you will, because I know we're busy and you gotta get going.
Sure, happy to do it. And with any remarkable effort and outcome, it's really a team, right? So John certainly is the architect, and I played a hand in it, but it's a team of really good people making really good decisions and strategically, taking some risks, certainly during the pandemic. But let me take you back a little bit and take the listeners back a little bit. So pre-pandemic, the Sonesta Hotel organization, which sits inside of a REIT, the REIT is called SVC. And Sonesta is 66% owned by the chairman of our company, Adam Portnoy and the Portnoy family, and 34% owned by the REIT. And Sonesta pre-pandemic was, 50, 60 hotels or so. And during the pandemic, the REIT that had relationships with Marriott and IHG and Wyndham and Radison and many of the brands that we all know today, those relationships fell apart during the pandemic. So the REIT, which has 300 hotels in it, elected to take back the hotels from the brands, most notably Marriott and IHG, 100 on the Marriott side, 100 on the IHG side, and put them into their Sonesta brand.
And then I have a question. When you say it fell apart, is that because they weren't able to pay fees, or
it was the commercial structure.
It was the commercial structure.
So, 2019 was the best year that the hospitality industry has ever seen, certainly in my 40 years. And 2020 was the worst, right, in 40 years. So when you go from, just in terms of RevPAR and the strength of the industry, when you go from the highest in 2019 and within 90 days in 2020, by March, the world had been introduced to COVID. And the industry collapsed along with many other industries. So when that, pandemic hit, the commercial structure, the Marriotts and the IHGs and some of the others, they couldn't comply with the terms of the commercial structure.
And usually in a commercial structure like that, is it very difficult to break away in most of those contracts, or did you guys negotiate a different type of contract?
It is, but it was the decision of Marriott and IHG to not move forward, and without getting too deep into the technical and the legalities of it all, let's just say it was the right time for the two parties to separate.
Perfect.
Fortunately, the SVC RMR organization, John Murray, Adam Portnoy, they had purchased a Sonesta brand many years before, so that in the event that there was a catastrophic event, they actually had a fallback position. Right?
Oh, so that was like
a strategic buy.
Plan for the best, hope for the worst.
Yeah.
Plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Yeah. So, so during the pandemic, Sonesta was starting to take back these hotels and deflag them as Marriotts and deflag them as Candlewoods and deflag them as Residence Inns and put them into the family of Sonesta brands. Sonesta Hotels, Sonesta Select, Sonesta Simply Suites, and Sonesta ES, and then there's Royal Sonesta. And while that was happening, I had left a very long career at Wyndham, where I was executive vice president of the Americas for. I was there for 27 years, but the majority of my time at the tail end was running the Americas. And so I'd left, and I was running a small hospitality investment firm, and the Redline Hotel Company, based in Denver, a public company, pre-pandemic had met with some challenges. The leadership had made some decisions that the franchise base didn't respond well to, and the market cap of the company had dropped about 66% in one day. So I was approached to meet with the board of that public company in Denver. And I went out to Denver a number of times pre-pandemic. This is around the December timeframe of 2019, December, January of 20, and met with the board. And as I was flying back one day, this thing called COVID hit, and that was March of 20. So, our discussions had stalled because of the pandemic. And then while SVC and John Murray and team were taking back these hotels from Marriott and IHG, I got the inclination to see if I could raise the capital to buy the Redline Hotel Company and do a public to private transaction. So while I was at Wyndham as executive vice president of the Americas, we had done a deal with SVC, and at the time it was called HBT with John Murray. And we did a 20-pack of hotels. And that's when I was introduced to John Murray. And, started a relationship, a business relationship. And that was many, many years ago. And so, I thought that this would be a great opportunity for Sonesta to potentially buy this Redline hotel company because it's a 100% franchise platform. And Sonesta, although they were taking back all these hotels from Marriott and IHG, they really didn't have franchising as an underlying growth model. So I reached out to John, connected through a friend, and reached out to John and said, "Hey, you guys are taking back all these hotels. I'm kind of on the front line of this opportunity. We can buy this company. It's public. We'll have to put in a bid on the stock. We'll have to get the shareholders to approve in our favor. But if successful, we can do a couple things. One, we can get Sonesta franchising up very quickly because we can leverage off of the platform. Right, we can leverage off of the existing platform, operations, legal, finance, IT.
Because it's all there.
It's all there. It's all there. Although it was banged up a little bit, pre-pandemic because of some of the decisions, and then of course the pandemic was also a challenging time. So John liked the thesis. The second kind of tier to the thesis was around scale. Sonesta is around 50,000 rooms on the owned and managed side, SVC owned and managed side, and RLH, the Redline Hotel Company, around 50,000 rooms. And so when you bring these two companies together, obviously you get to 100,000 rooms. And having had a front row seat at Wyndham from 1990 to my 27 years, that company started with just two hotel companies, Ramon and Howard Johnson, and it is what it is today, is one of the largest hotel companies in the world.
And with Wyndham, do you think of getting to that largest point, what % of that growth could be attributed to the franchise model?
It's 100% franchise.
So 100%. Because as I'm hearing you talk about, franchising really being the underlying engine for the growth, I did a program at MIT on entrepreneurship, and there's one of the speakers that came in said, he was talking about the franchise model. And he said, hey, entrepreneurs, for any business that you're in, whether you decide to franchise or not, building a platform so that you could make the decision to do it and having all the systems and processes in place, whether you decide to be a franchise or just carry on, it's only good. It's only accretive to what you're doing. Yeah. From your experience, I've just read so many times, but is franchising really the fastest way to grow and get that scale?
Well, I'm a little biased. I'm a 40-year, primarily franchise growth executive, but objectively, I would say that it is for a number of reasons. One, you're using other folks' capital. You're using other individuals' capital, right, to put more dots on the map. It's a very elegant business because it's really a fee-for-service business. You just take a percentage of the gross. The employees of the property are not your employees, right? The capital requirements at the asset are not your obligations. The underlying capital structure and the debt lenders, none of that's your obligation. You just take a percentage of the top line, and your obligation is really to drive revenue to the property, and then the other support and training, quality assurance, global sales, those types of things. So when you're looking to scale a business at a rapid pace, it is the most elegant way to do it, and the margins on the franchise business are extremely strong. The flow through on the franchise business is really, really impressive. What happens is once you build that underlying platform, everything that comes to the top line after your base expense is covered, it flows right to the bottom line. So just by way of example, if I have 100 employees today and I have 900 franchises, I could add 50 more franchises and only add one more body.
Wow.
Right? Because I just need somebody in the field from a support standpoint. But all the infrastructure is in place.
I mean, that's the true definition of scale, right? Lowering operating costs in proportion to net profit.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And then your existing base of properties, for every increase in RevPAR, there is no incremental expense, right? It goes 100% to the bottom line. So the combination of more dots and RevPAR that drives a huge margin to the bottom line. And so the unique aspect about Sonesta today is that now we have a franchise model, we have a management model, and then we have an ownership structure. And then SVC and Sonesta strategically can acquire hotels. So we'll look to acquire hotels in cities that we don't have a presence for Royal Sonesta. So it'll be in LA, as an example, where we are today, or Miami Beach. We're actively looking to acquire hotels. So the new Sonesta enterprise is really different than, again, by comparison, Wyndham, which is a pure asset-light play, global asset-light play, where we will always have assets in the Sonesta organization because of our close relationship with SVC.
Great. And then, so with all those dots on the map as far as the franchisees, what's the benefit to someone who owns a hotel to change flags to Sonesta, or just like to talk to you guys about, hey, I'd love to know about this franchise model. So I hear it's good for you as the operating company, but why is it how do you define the win-win for the franchisee and your team?
Yep. So just back to the acquisition on RLH. So once John Murray and Adam Portnoy approved the potential purchase for RLH, we made a bid. Ultimately, we were successful. And in March of 2021, we acquired the RLH business and took it private from public. The next day, we took it private. I went out to Denver, and for the course of 2021, kind of stabilized the business, worked with our existing franchisee base of approximately 900 hotels, and then very quickly got the franchise documents in place for Sonesta. And I think that's when we chatted. So in September of 21, we were already registered to sell franchises for four of the Sonesta brands. It'll lead back to the answer to your question. So we really weren't selling Sonesta franchises until September of 21. Oh. And by the time we ended 2021, we had one Sonesta franchise.
That you sold, a new one?
That we sold, and open and operating. So here we sit today, and if we look at 2022, which was our first full calendar year of franchise development, here we have 58 or 57 open and operating Sonesta franchises.
Wow.
Right. So in one calendar year, right? So then the question is, well, why would someone come to you versus staying in their existing franchise affiliation, and what's the appeal, and what's the value proposition? And there are a number. But, just to kind of tie it back to the opening question about what is hospitality, and caring for your franchisees is an absolutely critical piece to the franchise equation, because they're our customers. Our franchisees are our customers. The consumer is their customer, and they pay us to market to the consumer to drive them to the hotel. But at the end of the day, we have to realize that the franchisee is the one that's paying the fees into the organization, which pays the payroll and the salaries and everything else. So having a culture of caring for our franchisees is a bit of a point of difference. Now, most hotel companies will say that they have that. The question is, are they really delivering on it? And have they gotten to a place where they've lost sight of it, maybe because of the size or the scale? The other aspect is that we're owners and operators, right? We have 8,000 employees, give or take, right? We have 50,000 hotel rooms. So when we think about asking a franchisee to do a quality improvement, we have to ask ourselves first, right? And that gives franchisees a comfort level, because they then know that they're not going to be asked to do things that don't really give a return to them. Because first we have to ask ourselves, and we manage now 220 hotels. Own and manage, right? So you can imagine that the capital commitment that we would have to make if we agree with that product improvement plan or that quality assurance or that new standard. So that's a built-in. It's like a built-in governor, right? Which many companies don't have today. Many of the hotel companies that you see out there today, many of the big brands, they're all asset light. They do not own. They do not own hotels, right?
They've spun them all out.
Yeah. Now there might be some pockets here and there, but in the main, they're asset light. So we're 900 franchises, 220, 30 managed and owned hotels. And then I would say, lastly, in markets where there's opportunity, what you will find most of the time is that there's every Marriott brand. There's every IHG brand. There's probably every Wyndham brand. There's probably every Choice brand. So if you want to go into that marketplace, or if you want to stand alone outside of the sea of that brand, there you have to look for another option. And we are a good alternative option. And we're not public, right? The REIT is public. SVC is public. We're a private. Sonesta is a private company. And so, we have obligations that we impose on ourselves to achieve and grow, but we're not held to quarterly, growth objectives to hit our quarterly earnings, to get to the street.
Although you'd probably be blowing them out of the water right now.
We did in 22.
Yeah,
we did in 22.
So I'm curious, like being a fan of empathy, and so much of this defining hospitality is like how it makes you feel, how you make others feel. This, the DNA of caring, as you said.
Yeah.
So with the explosive growth that you're having with your overall business model, how do you scale that caring part of the DNA as well? Did you build infrastructure? How do you create accountability and measure that? Is there a way to do it? Like, how do you distribute it across all of your growth?
Yeah, so it's certainly gotten to be a bit more difficult in our post-COVID remote work Zoom meetings, because at the end of the day, it's about the culture, right? And when you're not sitting in the office every day with your teams, it is, I have found it harder to deliver the culture and stylistically to have people kind of, move in the same direction that you believe in. But it all starts with picking the right people on your team, and they've got the same beliefs and the same passion, the same understanding. At the core of it, particularly for the franchisees, understanding that they're our customer. Yeah, that sometimes is lost on folks, because they think that the customer is the person who walks through the front door and pays for the room, right? But ultimately, for a franchisor, the customer is the franchisee, and so you have to really have that. You have to understand and believe that that's kind of the core to the franchising model, and if you do, then delivering that caring attitude all the time. So it is scalable. It is something that you can achieve. I do find it a little bit more difficult though in a remote environment. It's just hard now. All of our many of our employees are remote, whereas years ago, everyone was in the office, and you could build the energy, and you could get the commitment from everybody, and you could see across the table, who's in and who's out, who's gonna make the run and who's not gonna make the run.
But then also, like internally with your team, you have a bit more control over who you're hiring, and you can really hire for culture.
Yeah.
Because skills can always be taught, right?
Yeah.
And obviously you're probably pulling people who have those skills, but it's really the culture is the most important part. Do you have that kind of screening for culture with your potential franchisees as well? Like whether they would fit with this caring DNA?
I would say yes and no. That's a little bit more challenging because it's once again at another arm's length distance.
Yeah.
What you attempt to do is when you look at an opportunity, you really look at a number of things, but most notably two things: the sponsor, meaning the owner, and then the asset.
Yeah.
Right. And the asset, is it the right quality? The conversation we had in the elevator, is it the right property for the right brand? Is it the right asset that fits into Sonesta Select? Is it the right asset that fits into Sonesta Hotel? And if you get through that, then you really start to kind of peel back the ownership. And is the ownership and is the sponsor, are they the right individuals? Do they have the right intentions? Do they have the right capital? Do they, what's their history? But in many cases, the folks that we're speaking to, they've got multiple hotels. I mean, they've proven themselves over and over again as entrepreneurs and as successful individuals. So adding another hotel into their portfolio of 10 or 11 or, we still do some, 1 and 2, single, particularly in the economy side in our ABVI brand. But when it comes to the Sonesta portfolio, they're usually more sophisticated, in some cases institutional owners. So.
And of the top 8 hotel companies, right, where you're now the 8th largest, and then if you look at all the brands within those 8 companies, I mean, it's got to be 100.
Oh, yeah.
100 more. How do you guys at Sonesta differentiate yourself to give that, alternate option, as you said before?
Yeah. Listen, it's amazing what's occurred over the course of the last 40 years. And, number one, the consolidation in the industry, but then, of course, the brands creating their own brands. And there's the number of brands that each one of the top 6 or 8 companies have. So it is becoming more challenging because we, as industry leaders, and certainly the developers, we've really cut the segments. When I first started, there was probably 6 segments: economy, mid, mid without food and beverage, upscale, upper upscale, luxury. Right now, if you you look
spectrum.
at it, and so we've really cut the segmentation, in more parts. How we really try to find a point of difference is back to some of the things that we touched on. If there's a property that is in a marketplace, it's likely there's a lot of Marriott rooms. So when you go to that central res system, you're going to be one of many Marriott properties. We have 220 managed properties and 55 franchise properties just on the Sonesta side. So that's a lot of white space for us to grow in the U.S., just in the U.S., right, in North America. And, as we were chatting, I just completed a trip back from Latin America and then just completed back Friday of last week a trip from Egypt.
Amazing.
Yeah, where we have presence in both countries. And in Latin America, we have a master developer called GHL out of Colombia, and they have an exclusive to sell franchise our Sonesta brands and a couple of our RLH portfolio brands, Redline, in Colombia, in Peru, in Chile, in Ecuador. And then in Egypt, we have 3 hotels, one in Cairo, one in Aswan, one in Luxor, and 6 Nile River cruise boats. So from a growth opportunity standpoint, the Americas are now set. We're registered to sell 16 brands from a franchising standpoint, from Mexico to Canada. And then, rest of world opportunity, the Sonesta name and the Redline brand name, plenty of opportunities for us to grow around the world. So we'll continue to remain focused on the Americas for opportunities where there is a lot of white space. But the rest of the world will hold many more opportunities for us as well.
Yeah. As you think about growth and kind of starting with pretty much a clean slate with 1,000 hotels or 900 hotels, are you creating any initiatives to help the guest or potential guest to book directly through you guys, or are you guys trying to control that direct to consumer, or is it an opportunity to be more direct to consumer than rather through OTAs and all those other margin eating endeavors?
Yeah, I would say that ultimately the goal is to drive consumers to your brand.com. And that way you're not running through the OTAs and paying the commission. But the OTAs are very powerful drivers of business, and that's where the scale comes in, right? Because if you have scale, you can go back to the OTAs, and let's just say by way of example, you were paying 20% or 22%. With scale, you can go back and you can renegotiate those agreements and get it down to 16 or 15.5, right?
That's meaningful.
Yeah, and so as you get the OTAs lower and lower on a commission basis, then they just become another channel for production at a reasonable commission, just like a travel agency. A travel agency is 10%. So, but in the end, what you really want to do is you want to build up your loyalty base through your loyalty club, and Travel Pass is our loyalty club. And then utilize your loyalty to drive consumers to your website, because you can only get points, and we only give points if you book through brand.com, right? And that's really how the majors have been able to kind of take back the customer base from the OTAs, because you can only get points if you book directly with the brand. And we'll follow the same path.
Yeah, I've also found that sometimes I'm in a pinch, I usually like booking directly through the brand, because usually I get a better room. I'm not on the second floor next to the dumpster.
Yeah.
But I also think it's a missed opportunity for many brands when someone does book through an OTA to kind of wow them, to not put them in that less desirable room and try and change their hearts and minds to book directly through them. Have you seen that in your journey at all?
No, that's I'm surprised that that's been your experience, because typically what happens is you just provide inventory, and like we would never provide inventory by the dumpster,
right?
Right. So we want to give a caring experience to all of our guests, whether they come through OTAs or not. But look, the OTAs, between Expedia and Booking and Priceline, Agoda, they are powerful, powerful marketing machines, and they will continue to drive, consumer eyeballs to their sites. If you look at the market cap of the top 4 hotel companies, Priceline alone is a larger market cap than the top 4 hotel companies. So when you put that in perspective,
scale,
what does it mean in terms of marketing dollars, right?
Yeah.
So you have to really find a way to partner and balance the relationship between the OTAs, and so we're working on those those types of structures as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, at what point in your career journey did the hospitality industry put its hooks in you? How did you know this is you?
Yeah, so I really didn't have much of a choice. My dad was the publisher of Lodging Hospitality for 25 years. Yeah, so we were going to the New York Hotel Show. At that time, it was in, I think, November, and it was at the Coliseum in New York City.
Oh, yeah, right. What's there now? The Mandarin Oriental or Time Warner Centers.
Yeah, down in Central Park.
Columbus Circle.
Yeah, Columbus Circle, exactly. And so I can remember, probably at the age of 7, 8 years old, going to the food vendors and thought this was the greatest thing. You can go to a trade show and just eat, eat off the food vendors. But getting out of high school, not really knowing exactly what I wanted to do, my dad said, look, why don't you try hospitality, because it has just so many unique aspects in terms of paths you can take. You can go in finance, you can go in development, you can go in marketing, you can go in sales, you can go in operations. It just goes on and on and on, right? Because it is a business. And it affords you travel, and if you like people and you're a people person, you're social, then you probably find it'll be a good fit. So I did go right off into hospitality school, and then got out of a hospitality college and went right into the Waldorf Astoria, did my my on-site operations work at the Waldorf Astoria. And then I had an opportunity to jump out of the property level into corporate, ironically, because it's taken me full circle in my career, to go to Boston and start a hotel company called Hawthorne Suites with a guy by the name of Joe McInerney. And Joe McInerney is a longtime hotel guy, Sheraton ITT Sheraton, president of DH in LA at one point in time. And so he said to my father, send him up. And back then there was no internet, and it was a franchise company, and when you sent out your franchise offering circulars, they were paper, and they're very big documents. And so I managed the mailroom for the franchise offering circulars in 1986. And ironically, the RMR SVC Sonesta organization is based in Newton, which is just a stone's throw away from where our offices were on 131 State Street in Boston. So 40 years later, I'm back in Boston slinging franchises again.
Wow, full circle.
Yeah.
One question I really enjoy asking everyone, it's kind of a time machine question. So if you, the Keith I'm talking to right now, appeared at Columbus Circle in front of your 7-year-old self, what advice do you give yourself?
Wow, that's a deep question. I would say that believe that you can accomplish things greater than perhaps you thought. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought that you could pull off $100 million acquisition of a franchise company during a pandemic, and we did it without ever leaving our home offices.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Who would have thought that you could, with a great team of people, build a hotel organization that pre-pandemic was small and relatively unknown, at least in the eyes of the industry from a broader standpoint, to then come out of a pandemic and wake up to be recognized, across the industry as a serious player and a competitor. It's just unheard of. 24 months,
It's wild.
Yeah.
And I think having met you recently and just experiencing you, I think it's, I get the feeling that you're always open to any and all opportunities.
Well, it was certainly a big awareness builder for me that something like this could be accomplished in during that time.
It's a big whale. I mean, you caught a big whale. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we did.
And and I know you said the moon's aligned, but I think it's like in this instance, it's really the solar system aligned.
Yeah.
And it's just so impressive, and I just love hearing about it, and I love your insights.
Yeah.
To it.
Thanks for.
And
talking.
I think it's really important to share this story too, because I think if people listening, I think that this will act as an inspiration to them and fuel for them to shoot for the stars.
Yeah. Yeah, look, there's great opportunities out there. Every day you just have to get up and you have to believe. And some days are good days, some days are setbacks, some days are bad days. But if you believe that there's an opportunity there, just keep on pushing. Through the process of trying to raise the capital to buy the Redline Hotel Company, I had probably 20 no's before I got one yes from John Murray.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's surprising. It was 20. I would think it would be more like 100.
Yeah, it was a lot of no's.
Right?
It was a lot of no's.
Wow.
Yeah. It was hard. It was hard to get people to focus and get the capital, certainly during a pandemic. Because again, you really just couldn't get to their offices and sit with them. And it's one thing to have a conversation over Zoom and run through the models and the thesis. It's another thing to sit in front of them and give them that kind of visual belief.
Yeah,
and
you have to sell the vision and paint that
Yeah.
really clear picture.
Yeah. It had it not been a pandemic, that organization would have been acquired by another company. But because of the pandemic, all of the companies were playing defense, except for SVC.
Yeah, and I know there's been a couple who've been on the offense, and they're really good stories. It's that that abundant mindset,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, the minute we came out of the pandemic, just by way of example, in 2021, the underwriting model to acquire the company, we were very conservative because when we did the underwriting model, it was during a pandemic. And we didn't know that, by the time you got to Memorial Day, certainly in the U.S., even though everyone was masked up and people were still getting sick, the population wanted to travel. And so by the time Memorial Day of 21 came around, the performance went off the charts, particularly for secondary locations where we have a lot of them on the highways, the economy hotels. And so our underwriting model, we just blew it out of the water, right? Because performance took off, and we wrote it to flat to 20, which was the worst year ever, right?
Wow.
And so here we are, 2.5 years later, and now we're getting back to 19 levels, in some cases surpassed.
Yeah, it's that it's that S curve you always read about, right?
Yeah.
You're investing, you dip, but then once everything comes back, you're outperforming.
Yeah, this one was a hockey stick almost.
I forget the S curve. It's and then you're always skeptical of that when you see the hockey sticks.
Yeah.
But it's such an amazing story, and I thank you. One other thing I wanted to introduce. You've heard of this Open AI or Chat GPT, the Open AI thing, where you ask
a little bit. Yeah.
So I asked it a question. I said, "What question should I ask you?"
Oh, okay.
And this AI said, "How does Sonesta ensure that its properties maintain high standards of service and guest experience?" That's from a computer, not me.
Wow, that's a good question from a computer. So a couple things. We own and manage 220 hotels, right? So, we, as an example, from a capital improvement standpoint, we'll put in SVC, we'll put in $600 million in capital into our managed estate, right? To continue to bring up the quality of the property in terms of its FF&E and its experience and all things furnishings. Our managed team, led by Vera and team, exceptional team, and will continue to drive the consumer experience. That's on called the owned and managed estate. On the franchise estate, a little different because, as we discussed earlier, we're obligated to drive to the top line performance and certainly ensure that the quality is there for the guest through quality assurance, through training, through social media reviews, TripAdvisor reviews, those types of things, right? So to keep in check with the quality of the properties. So that's a core competency of a franchisor. You have to have the ability to ensure your franchisees are delivering on the spirit and the experience, both on the service side as well as the quality side. We have an entire field organization. Their responsibility, in addition to the top line, is ensure that the quality is there and the experience is there. It does get tricky though when you scale. When you have 900 hotels or 6,000 hotels or 7,000 hotels, because to get enough human capital to deal with that level of scale is a little tricky, right? So, over the course of, time, utilizing technology has really started to play a role. Being able to do virtual quality assurance inspections versus personal quality assurance inspections, being able to use the social media, right, and all the social tools, because guests will let properties know when they have a bad experience. Yeah. They let the property know when they have a good experience, but more so when they have a bad experience, right? Yeah. And so when you start to see those, bad customer reviews, you can really narrow in on properties and bad behavior.
Cool.
Yeah, so there's tools in place to ensure that there's a good experience.
Great. Yeah. And then last question, as you look at coming where you are now and your trajectory, what's exciting you most about the future?
I'd say global expansion. Yeah, having had the opportunity in 22 and then certainly just a little bit into this year to spend time in Latin America to see the product there, just returning back from Egypt to see the product there. The Sonesta name, the Redline name, those brand names will resonate around the rest of the world. And so there's plenty of space for us to grow here in the Americas. But, establishing the Sonesta presence in key strategic markets and countries around the world. For me personally, I think that will be a a rewarding step in the journey to be able to spend a little bit more time internationally and globally growing the brand. I did that for a little bit on the Wyndham business. My primary responsibility in Wyndham was the Americas, but I was fortunate enough to spend time in China and Latin America and EMEA. So we can do the same here with Sonesta.
Wow, it's so exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I speak for myself and all of our listeners. Thank you for your time. I know how busy we're at Alice, and I know you're swinging for the fences. So
we'll be having a lot of meetings today. So we'll take advantage of our time here together and with all our fellow industry folks. So thanks for the time. Really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate your time as well, and thank you to our listeners. Without you, we wouldn't be doing this. So we keep growing every week. If this changed your idea on hospitality, giving, receiving, growing, please pass it along. We're growing all by word of mouth. So thank you all very much.